Welcome you to today's session. I am Caitlin Giles McCormick here with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. We have a lot of great information to share with you today, and today's session is an informational overview on NJEDA's real estate gap financing program. To officially start us off, I am going to switch things over to NJEDA's Executive Vice President of Real Estate Development and Programs, Dan Jennings. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are pleased to offer this competitive program to your communities. Our goal in doing so is to address the lingering economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in a way that fosters economic growth and recovery in your communities. Now, as some of you are aware, a lot of programs here at EDA have a hurdle or two. A key challenge with this program is that we're using COVID funds that must be expended by December 2026. Therefore, we're seeking projects that are ready, but for this funding source, or projects that can become ready in a quick amount of time. So what does ready mean? Ready means that the project has secured planning or zoning board approval. The capital stack is in place, or the capital stack can be put quickly in place. So as you consider projects for this program, ask yourself, do I have a project that can be completed by the November 2026 deadline? If so, this program could be a fit. So let me turn this presentation over to Liza Nolan, our Director of Real Estate Programs, and her team. They will walk you through the application process, key eligibility criteria, and answer any questions that you have. Liza?
Yes, thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. We'll start. So as Dan mentioned, next slide, the program is pretty simple in some sense. We're providing grants, as we do with many EDA programs, to eligible applicants for this program that can be a for-profit or a not-for-profit entity. And we are funding real estate development projects, and we'll talk about what kinds of projects are eligible. These projects must be located in what we'll describe as 25 municipalities, which are eligible distressed municipalities. And as Dan mentioned, the key part here is it requires gap financing, and the project would address some of the negative economic impacts lingering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Where we are at right now is that the board approved this new program, the Real Estate Gap Financing Program, in July. We just launched the application on our website on Thursday, and we are now talking through this webinar. It is a competitive scored application process, and it will remain open until January 8th. We do request that any questions that you have about the program be submitted within the first 30 days. That is how this program is set up. And we will then add them and respond to them in our FAQ, frequently asked questions document that we will post on the web page. Today, as you have questions, as Caitlin and Dan have mentioned, please put them in the Q&A feature. We will respond as we can today, but we will also add them to the FAQ so that anyone who's listening today or otherwise can see them and that everyone can have the same information. The application deadline, as mentioned, is January 8th. And this is, I will say this several times, this is a federally funded program. And so it's very important, as Dan mentioned, that we ensure that the projects that we fund meet the expenditure deadline of December 31st, 2026. Next slide. How much money we have? We have $10 million. Governor Murphy's fiscal year 2023 budget set aside funding for this program, as well as other programs that EDA has been implementing for real estate projects and community development projects. Again, this was set aside in the state budget, but it was utilizing the American Rescue Plan, state and local fiscal recovery funding. The grant funding, the minimum grant is $500,000 that we will provide, and the maximum grant per project would be $5 million. The total grant funding that we would provide cannot exceed 50% of the total of all project development costs. So the types of projects that we would be funding would be typically a minimum of $1 million, and we could provide 50% of that, or larger than that, and we would provide a maximum of $5 million. We would provide up to 50% of the total project development costs, and the total project development costs do not include acquisition or equity in the property. You'll see, and we'll explain to you as part of the application that you submit, when you put in the budget, it does not have the line for the acquisition because that is not part of the total project costs for this program. For funding, in order to be able to provide funds in a variety of locations and to different applicants, no applicant or an applicant-related entity may receive more than one grant award, and there would be a maximum of one grant or one application for any municipality. Next slide. I mentioned that we're providing funding through this program for a variety of real estate development project types. It could be a commercial, office, supermarket, grocery mix. It could be a mixed-use development. As with any EDA program, if there is residential involved in that, we do have and follow the state requirement that a minimum of 20% of the residential housing units be for low and moderate income households. We also allow for nonprofit or community use type projects, but these cannot be government owned projects, or a cultural performing arts type of project, and then manufacturing industrial. So those are the types of projects that we would fund. A couple of project types are ineligible. We do not fund 100% warehouse projects, nor 100% retail projects. Also, there is a requirement, and it's described in our board memo, that we do not fund projects that are primarily for government or educational use. And that is described as projects that have 51% or more for government, or if there's a lease situation, and we will provide more information on our website about that in our FAQ and in the board memo. Also, even though this program is for projects that are ready to proceed in a timely manner, projects that have started construction are ineligible for this program funding. Next slide. Project types, we do allow for either new construction or substantial rehabilitation. Again, there is a definition of what we consider substantial rehabilitation for this program. So please make sure you read through this. It's a part of it where the extent of the work is such that the building or the area cannot be occupied while the work is in progress and would require a new certificate of occupancy. That's the brief definition. So look at that definition, make sure your project meets that, and then it would meet the substantial rehabilitation project. It is not for projects that just are undertaking painting or floor finishings or other finishings. It really is for a substantial rehabilitation where a new CO is required. Next slide. Want to talk a little bit about the projects and the federal funding source. So there are a number of funding requirements and program requirements, and we'll detail these as we go through some of the requirements that we ask for in the application. But the projects must evidence a funding gap, as Dan mentioned at the beginning. So in the application, you will upload a budget and have a sources and uses, and there would be a funding gap that this program funding might fill. Other sources, in order to provide for readiness to proceed, you will show evidence of those other funding sources. Also, we ask you to describe how this project addresses some of the negative economic impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. As this program is funded through federal funding sources, there is a tie to the COVID-19 pandemic. New Jersey and many of our municipalities, especially our distressed municipalities where these projects must be located, had negative economic impacts. There might have been less commercial activity, a loss of some businesses, a loss of some foot traffic. And how would this project, whether it's a commercial, mixed use, or whatever you are proposing, address those economic impacts and bring more vitality, new business, new residents to the area in order to continue improvements and continue the economic recovery. Federal funding programs require that we also look at and make sure that this funding source is not replacing or duplicating any other funding sources. So in the application, you will have to fill out a duplication of benefit, make sure that the funding that this is being used for is not replacing any other federal funding or sources that you already have for the project. We also will undertake a cost reasonableness review to make sure that the projects are reasonable and consistent with other programs, projects that EDA has funded or the industry standards allow. We will require that there will be a 5-year deed restriction to ensure that the project continues the use that we have approved and provided grant funding for a minimum of 5 years. So if you're coming in as a mixed use project, we would require that the project, and you continue to report on it for the 5 years, retains its use as a mixed use project that we have approved. Also, requirements in construction must follow prevailing wage, New Jersey law regarding contractor registration, affirmative action, and other labor standards compliance requirements. All of this will be documented in a grant agreement that we would issue to the applicants that receive the funding for this. And that grant agreement would entail all of the requirements of the funding. It would describe the monitoring that we would undertake as EDA staff, how you would submit progress reports in order to ensure that you are meeting that federal funding expenditure deadline and completion by December 31st, 2026. And it would describe the method by which we would disperse funds. This program would disperse funds as a real estate construction project, and it would be a reimbursement once you are undertaking the construction. You would submit the documentation to us that the construction has been completed, and we would pay out on no more frequently than a monthly basis during that construction period. Okay, next, and we'll turn it over to Giancarlo, who will walk us through some of the other eligibility requirements and a snapshot view of the application.
Thanks, Liza, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to walk you through the next section of the program. First is eligible applicants. As Liza mentioned earlier, this program is for for-profit and not-for-profit development entities. And then note, there's a maximum of 1 grant application per applicant or EIN number. Applicants must be in good standing with the state of New Jersey. So we'll look at tax clearance, DOL, and DEP checks. We'll do a legal review of the entity submitting an application. Ineligible entities would include city, county, and state entities, any state colleges or universities, and any government entity that may also have nonprofit status. Liza mentioned earlier that there are 25 eligible municipalities. That was approved by our board based on the criteria here, the top 20% of municipalities within the 2023 Municipal Revitalization Index. This is the state's official measure and ranking of municipal distress. It's available through the Department of Community Affairs website. The second criteria is the top 20% of municipalities based on commuter adjusted population. And this is a calculation done through the American Community Survey, publicly available data, and you can see the calculation here. The eligible municipalities, I'm not going to read them off, but include a variety of municipalities here in the state of New Jersey, in North, Central, and South Jersey. It does exclude several cities which have received funding from other EDA programs recently. That includes the ART Phase 1 program, the AC Revitalization, and the Urban Investment Fund. So if the municipality that your project would be in was eligible for one of those programs, that project is not eligible for the real estate gap financing program. Some application notes. This is an online application. It's through the NJEDA Common Application Portal. There's program-specific documentation that you would need to provide, including narrative uploads. There is no application fee for this program. Again, I'm going to underline that there is no application fee for this program. The application, as Liza mentioned, is open for 90 days. It opened last Thursday. It will close on January 8th. That'd be a little bit more than 90 days. January 8th. It is competitively scored, and there will be an internal review here at the EDA. All funding awards will be presented to the board for funding approval. So staff will review and make a recommendation, but the board of the EDA will make final approval on all funding awards. For scoring, you need to meet a minimum of 65 points to be considered for funding. And the criteria here, and Liza mentioned it, Dan mentioned it, but I think it's worth repeating. Readiness to proceed and the project concept together make up 60% of the scoring. That's 60% of the available points are based in those two categories. So project concept, project benefits is a scoring criteria, experience and capacity of the applicant. And we understand that the applicant is the organization, the entity submitting the application. We also understand and expect that some applicants will have a team that they partner with to develop a project. That experience and capacity will also include their experience and capacity. So that's something to consider as you're putting together your application and your team. Readiness to proceed and the reasonableness of the timeline. Again, we're very interested in that December 2026 timeline. So please be mindful of that as you're submitting. And then financial feasibility and cost effectiveness is another factor that we wanted to mention. This is a competitive program. Again, it's not rolling. It's not first come, first serve. So applications will not be reviewed until the application window closes on January 8th. I'm going to take you through part of the application, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on specific pages, but I do want to focus on the program specific pages here that you'll need to fill out. So this is the general page that you would go to on the EDA website for the application center. If you have not already submitted something here with the EDA, you will click register, you'll create a username. This will allow you to go back to your application, save it, go back to it before you submit. If you've previously applied to a program with us, you would just sign in and go from there. If you forgot your password, please, click the forgot password button and you'll go through those instructions. You'll see the application center sign-in page. You cannot see our program on the page right now, but we are all the way at the bottom. We are the newest program that just launched. So you'll find real estate gap financing on the list. It's toward the bottom, and you'll click that to start a new application. When you do start this application, please make sure you read the opening page. This describes a little bit more about the program, eligibility, the projects, some other pertinent information that would help you as you go further along. If you do need language assistance, this is also where you would click to receive that. Again, I mentioned earlier the entity who is applying for the program should have a primary point of contact, and it's worth mentioning whoever is designated as the primary point of contact will receive correspondence from the EDA, whether that's for clarifying questions, any missing information, and any information that needs to be sent out in terms of an approval letter, a grant award, what have you. So please be mindful about who is being selected as the primary point of contact. There are other points of contact that will be listed in this, whether it's a media contact or an authorized representative, someone from the organization, whether that's the CEO or some chief C-level executive. That's something that you need to be mindful of. The authorized representative is the next piece, and I started mentioning that, but this is a person who is legally allowed to sign documents on behalf of the entity. So this is another point to make. It may be the same person as the primary point of contact. It may be a different person, but just please be mindful of that as you're filling this out, that we do ask for both a primary point of contact and an authorized representative who can bind the organization. As you go through, there's a project overview page, and we will ask different types of questions. And again, Liza mentioned the project can be new construction or substantial rehabilitation. There's a definition there on substantial rehabilitation as a kind of help text, just to make sure, again, you see it right there before you select it. The type of project, and then you would work through and put in the information about the location of your project, what's going to be developed, whether it's new construction or substantial rehab. This is also where you'll upload a narrative about your project proposal. For the project finance page, it's a two-parter, but there is a downloadable project budget template that Liza alluded to earlier. Please download our form, fill it out, and upload it as an Excel document. That's very helpful for us in order to make things easy to review. The project template has specific line items that we are asking you to fill out. So please be clear. And if you have any notes on them, please add them to the far right, be to the right of the column where you enter the amount of funding. Grant funding may not exceed 50% of total project development costs. And again, to reiterate, acquisition costs and equity are not part of the total project development costs. They are not eligible costs for this program. We also ask you to upload a pro forma. We do not have a template for this. However, you will see the help text here in terms of items that we are requesting you provide. So we understand everybody in the development world develops these differently, an operating pro forma, but there are a minimum number of items that we're expecting you provide, and that's further spelled out here in the application. If you have evidence of financing, if, as Dan mentioned, if you're putting together your capital stack and you have other sources of funding, proof of that funding is required at time of application. We'll ask you to upload that here. And again, there's help text to guide you of what types of documents we will accept. Again, readiness to proceed. We talk about your timeline. We talk about the status of any contracts that you may have already for the project, things that you're working towards now. Again, as Liza mentioned, this is subject to prevailing wage law, public works contractor registration, any other requirements in that regard. So please be mindful of that as you're working through any agreements. And if it does not have that, maybe there's still time to amend it before you submit your application. If you are doing any work with any small, women, minority, veteran, business-owned enterprises, please also mention that here. Permits and timelines, again, readiness to proceed. If you have permits, if you have approvals, please upload them. The status of that, if it's a narrative where you describe where you are in that process, that's also helpful. And then we also ask that you upload a timeline. Experience and capacity, again, I mentioned this earlier. We want to understand your team's prior relevant work experience and the ability to move through this project and get it completed by the December 2026 deadline. So we'll ask you to upload a narrative about your experience, your team's experience on this. We also ask that you upload a chart with any projects you've completed over the last 5 years, and the chart should include project name, location, start date, end date, acquisition cost, total development cost, etc. This is helpful for us to think about capacity and your ability to get this project done. And again, if you are a developer who maybe hasn't had an extensive track record, but you have partners who do, that's also going to be helpful for you here. So please be mindful as you're putting together your team and your own history, who you're bringing to the table, and what their experience is. I'm going to turn it back over to Liza for questions.
Thanks, Giancarlo. So yes, I do just want to reiterate the deadline for the application is January 8th. But if you do have any specific questions, please submit them through our real estate info at njeda.gov, or com email address, and then we will post them in a frequently asked questions document. The timing for this is that once applications are submitted by January 8th, as Giancarlo mentioned, at that point is when EDA staff will start opening and looking at the applications that were submitted. We will undertake an application review for initial eligibility and completeness, and we can request incomplete or cure documentation. This is a competitively scored process, so EDA staff will review those eligibles that were deemed complete and eligible, and then the highest scored would be allocated funding, and then down through the amount of funding that we have available. All of the program awards for funding, as well as any declinations of projects that are not awarded funding, will be presented to the EDA board. And then once the board approves them, an approval letter outlining the process would be issued to the applicants. And then, as we've described, a full grant agreement would be executed detailing the funding, the federal requirements, and all of the other timelines and details, and detailing the disbursement process for the actual grant. EDA does have a number of other programs, so this program will meet some of the needs here, but there are other programs available on our website if after this webinar it does not seem that this is an exact match for you. So we do want to respond to some of the questions that we've received, although all of the questions we will then post in our FAQ to make sure we share the information with others as well. We talked about eligible applicants being not-for-profit or for-profit development entities. Government entities are excluded, as are state universities or colleges. So if there is a state college or university that has a nonprofit, or a government entity that has a nonprofit, that is also excluded from this. So I'm not sure if that answers one of the questions that was posed, but if not, please submit it in writing to our real estate info email box. There's also a question about if you have received federal funding towards a project, but it's not enough, can we use EDA funds for the gap? So this is a gap financing program, so it's hard to answer a specific question. If the project has started construction, the project would be ineligible. But if you are putting together your capital stack, getting all of your permits in place, as Dan mentioned at the beginning, showing that readiness to proceed, which is critical for the application and for the scoring criteria, but you need a funding source to make sure that your funding is complete to complete the project, this could be a source of that funding. So it's hard to answer each specific, but it seems like if you have part of your funding in place and you're still putting together your capital stack and you have a gap but have not started construction, then this could be a source here.
One question I think I can answer, Liza. The one
Sure.
question is whether awards are rolling or whether that determination will be made after the January deadline. This is not a program where we are awarding funds on a rolling basis. This is a competitively scored application. So after the January deadline, as Liza mentioned, we'll review applications, and then all applications that score highly and are recommended to the board for approval will go to the NJEDA board. Projects that either do not score high enough or have other issues that need to be declined will also go to the board for declination.
Mhm.
And I think I can answer one other one. I think it asks about the town of Bergenfield. Bergenfield is not eligible for this program.
Mhm. There's also a question of an entity that may have received funding through one of EDA's programs, the Activation, Revitalization, Transformation Grant. And again, those for phase one of that project, if that's when you receive the funding, then you would not be eligible, or the location would not be eligible under this program. So I'm not sure if that answers that question or not. The types of project that we're talking about are substantial rehabilitation or new construction. So it could be a mixed use project depending on how you structure that, including residential or not. I'm trying to see if that's the question that's being answered. If you have a property already, but you might be maybe adding new construction component, that might be eligible, but we'll address that in a frequently asked questions document format. Whether the property has to be owned already or could be purchased after approval. So we do require that you have evidence of site control. That could mean that you already own it. It could also mean you have a purchase agreement or letter of intent. Our funding and our budget does not pay for or include the acquisition cost, but you could acquire it once you know that you might receive this funding and all your other funding, and then acquire it with other funding sources separate from this budget. And then our funds would pay for maximum 50% of the total project cost, which would exclude that acquisition piece. So it could be eligible, it depends. I do want to reiterate, this is a tight timeline. Those of you who have been involved in real estate development, we are allowing applications through January 8th, 2025, and then reviewing them, taking them to board for our approval in the spring. And then we would be approving those and issuing grant agreements. And then it would be a really tight timeline to make sure you complete the project and our funds are fully dispersed by December. In the application, please be clear, show as much information as you can to address the points that we provide in the application pages. As Giancarlo mentioned, at the top of each section, we indicate 30 points for readiness to proceed in project timeline, 20 points. 20% of the scoring is for your evidence of your experience and capacity of the applicant and the development team. So please provide as much detail as would be helpful to strengthen your application and show how you meet those funding requirements or scoring factors. Other questions to be answered, Giancarlo or others, as you see any?
I think I see one specifically about North Brunswick Township, and no, North Brunswick is not eligible for this program. There are other EDA programs. I'm not sure what the context of that project is that was put in the Q&A, but there are other programs here at NJEDA that might be relevant. So if you do have additional info, whether it's this individual or others, please send an email to realestateinfo or customercare@njeda.gov. That's another email address that you can reach out to, and we can connect you to the right folks here at the EDA who might be able to support projects that are not eligible for this program.
There's also a question about if Davis-Bacon Wage Act is applicable to this program. So this is a federally funded program, but New Jersey Prevailing Wage Act and requirements about contractor registry, New Jersey contractor registration, affirmative action, and other labor standards compliance will be applicable to this program. So it is New Jersey prevailing wage. That is not the same as the New Jersey minimum wage. The prevailing wage deals with construction and classification of wages paid to people working on construction projects, in this case, based on their level of wage term, or I forget the exact name, but carpenter versus a laborer versus a engineer kind of thing. Working on the construction site, there are different wages per that specialty, each specialty. So the project completion, we do expect they will be completed. Our funds will have to have been fully dispersed for project reimbursement costs. So we would like or hope that applicants would show in their application that they would be receiving full certificate of occupancy, or if they only anticipate temporary certificate of occupancy, they should indicate that in the application. So site control is a requirement here. So depending on how you're structuring that site control, if you currently have an option to purchase, or you have a lease that may turn into an option to purchase, then you would be acquiring that site that could be eligible. Again, we'll look at that and perhaps provide a little more detail in our FAQ. But also please describe that fully in your application so we have a sense of what site control you have, and look at what requirements we list in the application to make sure you are evidencing that site control. We touched on most of the questions, and as I said, those that we were not quickly able to answer, such we will put into our FAQ document. We do encourage all interested parties to continue to look at our website and to submit all questions during the next month to realestateinfo@njeda.gov or com.
Les, I think one just came in, and I can just mention one piece of this is that a project that is 100% residential is not eligible for this program. So it would have to be at least a mixed use project. And again, it would have to be New Jersey prevailing wage.
Okay, I think that's all the questions at this time. But again, we do encourage you to continue to look at the website. We will be posting, as Caitlin said, this information. We will also be posting a sample application on the website and the document of frequently asked questions soon. Frequently asked questions document would be updated once we receive all of the final questions during the next 30 days approximately. And be sure to check on those so that you have the current information before submitting.